The steel chains bit into Clara James' wrists as she stood trembling on the wooden auction block. Her honey-blonde hair matted with dust and tears streaming down her dirt-smudged face. Whiskey-soaked jeers rose from the crowd of miners and drifters gathered in the dusty square of Silver Creek, Colorado. The year was 1876, and in this lawless corner of the territory, human dignity was just another commodity to be bought and sold. $500 for this fine young woman, shouted the auctioneer, a corpulent man with a greasy handlebar mustache and eyes that held no more compassion than coins. Strong back, pretty face. She'll cook your meals and warm your bed. Clara kept her eyes fixed on the distant mountains, refusing to look at the sea of leering faces. 3 weeks ago, she had been traveling west with her father when their stagecoach was attacked by bandits. Her father had been killed, and she had been taken a prize to be sold to the highest bidder by the notorious Rawlins gang. At 22, she had gone from being a schoolteacher's daughter to human merchandise in the blink of an eye. "Do I hear 600? The auctioneer's voice cut through her thoughts. From the back of the crowd, a tall figure pushed forward. Broad-shouldered and lean-hipped, he moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to making his own path. His face was partially obscured by the shadow of his hat brim, but Clara caught a glimpse of piercing blue eyes and a strong jaw darkened with several days' worth of stubble. 700, came his deep voice, calm and steady amid the chaotic noise. The crowd turned, murmuring. Everyone in Silver Creek knew of Brock Vaughn, the taciturn rancher whose spread lay 10 miles outside of town. He was known for his fair dealings and his tendency to keep to himself. What wasn't known was why such a man would suddenly appear at a slave auction run by the territory's most dangerous outlaws. 700 from Vaughn, the auctioneer crowed. "Do I hear 8? A burly miner with a red beard raised his hand. 800. 9, Brock countered without hesitation. Clara's heart hammered in her chest. She didn't know this man, couldn't tell if being purchased by him would be salvation or merely a different kind of hell. But there was something in those blue eyes, a steadiness that spoke of purpose, beyond the sordid transaction taking place. The bidding continued, climbing higher as the red-bearded miner and Brock Vaughn matched each other dollar for dollar. At $1,500, a small fortune in the territory, the miner finally shook his head and spat on the ground. "Sold!" The auctioneer's gavel came down with a crack that made Clara flinch. "To Brock Vaughn for $1,500. 2 of the Rawlins gang members pulled Clara roughly from the platform, half dragging her through the parting crowd toward her new owner. As they approached, she got her first clear look at him. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with a face weathered by sun and wind but handsome in its austerity. He wore no gun belt, which was unusual in these parts, but the large hunting knife sheathed at his side gleamed in the afternoon sun. "Payment first, Vaughn," growled one of the men holding Clara's chains. Without a word, Brock reached into his vest and produced a leather pouch. He counted out the gold coins deliberately, his eyes never leaving Clara's face. When the transaction was complete, he finally spoke directly to her. "Miss, I apologize for this indignity." Before Clara could respond, Brock's hand moved to his knife with startling speed. In one fluid motion, he drew it and brought it down not on her, but on the chains between her shackled wrists. The blade must have been extraordinarily sharp, or the chains surprisingly weak, for they separated with a metallic snap. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. The 2 gang members reached for their pistols, but Brock was already moving, sweeping Clara into his arms with surprising gentleness. "What in tarnation?" began one of the outlaws, but he never finished his sentence. The sound of pounding hooves filled the air as a dozen riders appeared at the edge of the square, rifles raised. At their head was a silver-badged man Clara recognized as the U.S. Marshal from Denver who had visited her father's school once to speak about law on the frontier. "Nobody move," the marshal shouted. "By the authority of the United States government, you're all under arrest for illegal slave trading." In the confusion that followed, Brock carried Clara swiftly to where his horse waited, a magnificent chestnut stallion that stood calmly amid the chaos. With one arm still supporting her, he swung himself into the saddle and pulled her up in front of him. "Hold tight," he murmured, and then they were galloping away from Silver Creek, leaving behind the shouts and gunfire as the marshal's men clashed with the Rawlins gang. Clara clung to the saddle horn, her mind whirling. The shackles still dangled from her wrists, but the connecting chain had been severed. The wind stung her tear-streaked face as they rode, and she had no idea where they were headed or what awaited her. All she knew was that this stranger had just risked his life to free her from certain misery, and for that, at least, she was grateful. They rode hard for what seemed like hours, the landscape changing from the dusty flats around Silver Creek to rolling hills dotted with scrub pine and juniper. As the sun began to set, painting the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Brock finally slowed their pace to give the horse a rest. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice close to her ear. Clara nodded, though in truth she felt far from all right. Her body ached from days of rough treatment and her wrists were raw beneath the iron shackles. "Where are we going?" she managed to ask. "My ranch," Brock replied. "It's safe there. No one will find you. The Marshal Bennett is a friend. He'll deal with the Rawlins gang. Our job was to get you out." Clara twisted in the saddle to look up at him. "You planned this, together?" A faint smile touched Brock's lips. "Been planning it for weeks. The Rawlins gang has been kidnapping travelers and selling them all across the territory. Bennett needed evidence to bring them down, and I couldn't stand by and let innocent people suffer. So you purchased me as part of this plan," his expression sobered. "I didn't purchase you, Miss James. I paid ransom to free you. There's a difference. That money will be evidence against them, every coin marked by the Denver Mint specifically for this operation." Clara felt a surge of emotion, relief, gratitude, and something else she couldn't quite name. "You know my name, Clara James. You were traveling with your father, Professor Edward James, from Boston to San Francisco where he was to take up a teaching position." His voice softened. "I'm truly sorry about your father." Tears welled in Clara's eyes at the mention of her father. "How do you know all this?" "The Stagecoach Company reported the attack. When we learned the Rawlins gang was behind it and that a young woman had been taken, Bennett recruited me to help. I've had experience with these situations before." There was something in his tone that hinted at a personal history with such tragedies, but Clara didn't press. They rode in silence for a while, the rhythm of the horse's gait and the warmth of Brock's presence behind her providing an unexpected comfort. As night fell, the outline of a ranch house appeared in the distance, nestled against a backdrop of pine-covered hills. Smoke curled from its chimney and lamplight glowed in the windows. It wasn't a grand mansion by any means, but it looked solid and well-maintained, a true home rather than just a dwelling. "Valor Ranch," Brock said as they approached. "It's not much, but it's mine." They were met at the door by an elderly Mexican woman who exclaimed in Spanish at the sight of Clara's condition. "Rosita, this is Miss James," Brock explained as he helped Clara dismount. "She's been through an ordeal. Could you please prepare the guest room and a hot bath?" The woman nodded vigorously and hurried back inside, continuing to speak rapidly in Spanish. "Rosita has been with me since I established the ranch," Brock explained as he helped Clara into the house. "She's saying she'll take good care of you and that those animals who hurt you should be fed to the coyotes. I can't say I disagree." Despite everything, Clara found herself smiling faintly at the translation. The house's interior was simply but comfortably furnished, with a large stone fireplace dominating the main room. Bookshelves lined one wall, an unexpected sight in a frontier ranch house, and Clara noted volumes of Shakespeare, Thoreau, and Whitman among the titles. "You're a reader," she observed with surprise. Brock shrugged. "Winters are long out here. Books are good company." He gestured toward a ladder-back chair near the fire. "Please sit. Let me see about those shackles." Clara sank gratefully into the chair, suddenly aware of how exhausted she truly was. Brock knelt before her and gently took her wrists in his hands, examining the iron bands that still encircled them. "These are cruelly made," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Designed to chafe and hurt. I'll need tools to remove them properly." He rose and went to a cabinet, returning with a small wooden box. Opening it, he removed several slender metal implements that Clara recognized as lockpicks. "You know how to pick locks?" she asked. A shadow passed over his face. "Let's just say it's a skill I acquired out of necessity." His fingers worked deftly, and within minutes the first shackle fell away, revealing the raw, bleeding skin beneath. Brock's jaw tightened at the sight, but he said nothing as he moved to the second wrist and repeated the process. When both shackles lay on the floor, he gently cleaned her wounds with a cloth dampened in a basin of water that Rosita had quietly provided. His touch was surprisingly gentle for such large, calloused hands. "Thank you," Clara whispered, "for everything." Brock nodded once, seemingly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Rosita will show you to your room. There's fresh clothing there. It might not fit perfectly, but it's clean. Rest tonight. Tomorrow we can discuss your plans." "My plans?" Clara echoed, suddenly realizing she had none. Her father was dead, their belongings stolen, and the position in San Francisco had been for him, not her. She was alone in a strange territory with nothing to her name. Something in her expression must have conveyed her distress, for Brock's face softened. "You can stay here as long as you need, Miss James. You're safe now." Before Clara could respond, Rosita appeared in the doorway and beckoned to her. With a final grateful look at her rescuer, Clara rose and followed the housekeeper down a short hallway to a modest but clean bedroom. A copper-hip bath steamed in the corner, and a simple cotton nightgown lay folded on the bed alongside a towel. "Gracias," Clara said, one of the few Spanish words she knew. Rosita smiled warmly, patted her arm, and left her to her privacy. For the first time in weeks, Clara was alone and unbound, free to move as she wished. The enormity of her changed circumstances washed over her, and she sank onto the edge of the bed, silent tears sliding down her cheeks, not from sorrow this time, but from overwhelming relief. Later, after washing away the dirt and blood of her captivity in the blessed heat of the bath, Clara slipped into the nightgown and crawled beneath the clean sheets of the bed. Outside her window, she could hear the night sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the soft whicker of horses in the barn, the chorus of crickets and night birds. They were peaceful sounds, ordinary sounds that spoke of a normal life continuing beyond the nightmare she had endured. Sleep claimed her quickly, but her dreams were troubled by phantom chains and the faces of the men who had held her captive. Several times she startled awake, heart pounding, only to be soothed back to sleep by the gentle creaking of the house, and the knowledge that her door had a lock she controlled. Morning came with the crowing of a rooster and the scent of coffee and bacon wafting under her door. Clara dressed in the clothes that had been left for her, a simple blue calico dress that hung a bit loose on her frame, and ventured out to the main room of the house. Brock sat at a rough-hewn table, a newspaper spread before him and a coffee cup at his elbow. He rose when she entered, that innate courtesy again surprising her. "Good morning, Miss James. I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in weeks," she replied honestly. "Though I fear I'm imposing on your hospitality." He shook his head. "Not at all. Please sit. Rosita has prepared breakfast." As if on cue, the housekeeper emerged from the kitchen bearing a plate laden with eggs, bacon, and biscuits. She set it before Clara with a flourish and a stream of Spanish that made Brock smile. "She says you're too thin and must eat everything," he translated. Clara found herself unexpectedly hungry and did justice to the meal while Brock returned to his newspaper. In the light of day, she could study him more closely. His dark hair was neatly trimmed, though a bit longer than fashion dictated in the East. The stubble she had noticed yesterday was gone, revealing a strong jawline and the faint scar that ran along it. His hands, when they weren't performing delicate tasks like picking locks, moved with the confident economy of a man accustomed to physical labor. "Marshal Bennett will be riding out today," Brock said eventually, folding his newspaper. "He'll want your statement about what happened." Clara nodded, setting down her fork. "Of course, will all of them be arrested, the men who sold me? Those that survived the gunfight, yes." Bennett said it got messy after we left. 3 of the Rollins gang were killed resisting arrest, including the auctioneer. She should have felt something at this news, satisfaction, perhaps, or at least relief, but Clara found herself oddly numb to their fates. And the others who were bidding. The red-bearded man. Brock's expression darkened. "Hank Mercer. He's done time before for similar offenses. Yes, he and several others were arrested as accomplices. The territorial judge is riding circuit and should reach Silver Creek within the week to hold preliminary hearings." The thought of facing her captors in court sent a chill through Clara, but she straightened her shoulders. "I'll testify, of course. Whatever is needed to see justice done. It may not be necessary." The marshal found considerable evidence in their camp, including personal effects from other victims. He hesitated, then added gently, "Including some items that may have belonged to your father. Bennett will bring them when he comes." Fresh grief washed over Clara at the mention of her father. Edward James had been a kind, scholarly man whose greatest adventure had been accepting a prestigious position at a new university in San Francisco. That journey had cost him his life. "I don't even know where he's buried," she whispered, tears threatening. "The stagecoach company recovered the bodies after the attack," Brock said. "Your father was laid to rest in the cemetery at Fort Collins. I can take you there if you wish." The kindness in his offer nearly undid her composure. "Thank you. I would appreciate that, once this business with the marshal is concluded." They lapsed into silence then, Clara finishing her breakfast while Brock rose to pour himself more coffee. Through the window, she could see the expanse of his ranch rolling pasture dotted with cattle, a corral where several horses grazed, outbuildings that spoke of a prosperous but not ostentatious operation. "How long have you had this place?" she asked, genuinely curious about the man who had risked so much to save her. 8 years, Brock replied, returning to the table. "I came west after the war with nothing but my horse and the clothes on my back, worked cattle drives, saved every penny. When this land came up for sale, I took a chance. You fought in the war." Many of the men she had encountered in her journey west bore the physical or psychological scars of that terrible conflict. He nodded once, his expression closing slightly. "Union cavalry, but that's a lifetime ago now." Clara sensed he didn't wish to discuss it further and changed the subject. Your ranch is lovely. I can see why you're proud of it. It's a good life, he agreed, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. Hard work, but honest. The land gives back what you put into it. There was a reverence in his voice when he spoke of his land that Clara found moving. This was clearly not just a business venture to him, but a true home, something she herself had lost. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. Brock rose and moved to the window, his posture relaxing when he identified the rider. "It's Bennett," he confirmed, turning back to Clara. "Are you up to speaking with him now?" Clara nodded, smoothing down her borrowed dress and tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "Yes, I'm ready." Minutes later, Marshal Nathan Bennett was seated at the table with them, his weathered face solemn as he removed his hat. He was an older man, perhaps in his 50s, with graying hair and the vigilant eyes of someone who had seen the worst of humanity, yet remained determined to uphold the law. "Miss James," he said with a respectful nod, "I can't tell you how relieved I am to see you safe. When we learned of your father's death and your abduction, I feared the worst." "Thanks to Mr. Vaughn, the worst was averted," Clara replied, glancing gratefully at Brock. Bennett nodded. "Vaughn's a good man. When I needed someone I could trust for this operation, he was my first and only choice." He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "I believe these belong to you, miss." Clara's hands trembled as she accepted the package. Unfolding the cloth, she found her father's pocket watch, his wedding ring, and the small cameo brooch that had belonged to her mother. Tears blurred her vision as she ran her fingers over these precious mementos. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching them to her chest. The marshal cleared his throat, clearly moved by her emotion but determined to proceed with business. "I'll need your account of what happened, Miss James, from the stagecoach attack until yesterday. Take your time." For the next hour, Clara recounted her ordeal: the ambush on the dusty road, her father's murder, the weeks spent bound and transported from camp to camp, as the Rawlins gang moved through the territory, culminating in the auction at Silver Creek. Bennett took careful notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions but mostly allowing her to tell her story without interruption. Through it all, Brock remained silent, but Clara was acutely aware of his presence: the tightening of his jaw when she described her mistreatment, the whitening of his knuckles as he gripped his coffee cup. His anger on her behalf was palpable, yet controlled, channeled into a quiet intensity that she found oddly comforting. When she finished, Bennett tucked his notebook away and regarded her solemnly. "You've shown remarkable courage, Miss James. Your testimony, along with what we found at their camp, should be more than enough to see those men hang." The bluntness of his statement startled Clara, but she nodded. Justice in the territories was often swift and final. "What happens now?" she asked. "The preliminary hearings begin next week in Silver Creek. I'd like you to be present, but you won't have to speak in open court just yet. Judge Harmon will want to see you and confirm your statement privately." Bennett glanced at Brock. "I assume she can stay here until then." "Of course," Brock replied without hesitation. "Miss James is welcome for as long as she needs." Bennett nodded, satisfied. "Good. Now, there's the matter of your future plans, Miss James. Do you have family back east who could assist you?" Clara shook her head. "My mother passed away years ago, and my father was an only child, as am I. There are distant cousins in Boston, but we've never been close. And the position in San Francisco, it was for my father, not me. I doubt the university would have any interest in employing his daughter instead." The marshal frowned thoughtfully. "The territorial governor has established a fund for victims of criminal activity. It's not much, but it might help you get established somewhere. Silver Creek could use a school teacher once this business with the Rawlins gang is sorted out." The idea of remaining in the very town where she had been auctioned like cattle made Clara's stomach tighten. I'm not sure I could live there after what happened. Of course, Bennett said quickly. Forgive me. That was thoughtless. There's no rush to decide anything, Brock interjected. Miss James can take time to consider her options. Clara shot him a grateful look. The thought of making life-altering decisions in her current state felt overwhelming. Bennett stayed through midday, going over additional details of the case and the upcoming legal proceedings. When he finally departed, promising to return in a few days to escort Clara to Silver Creek for the hearings, she felt drained but resolute. This chapter of her life would be closed properly, with justice served. "You did well," Brock said after the marshal had ridden away. "Bennett is impressed with your composure." "Truthfully, I don't feel very composed," Clara admitted, "but I won't let those men see me broken. They've taken enough from me already." Brock studied her for a moment, a new respect in his gaze. "No, they haven't broken you, far from it." He gestured toward the door. "Would you like to see the ranch? Some fresh air might do you good after reliving such memories." The suggestion was exactly what Clara needed, something normal, something present to focus on rather than the horrors of the past weeks. "I'd like that very much." They walked together around the ranch grounds, Brock pointing out various aspects of his operation with quiet pride. The main barn housed not only his working horses, but a small breeding program for quality stock. The cattle that dotted the nearby pastures were a carefully selected herd, built up over years of selective breeding. "You've created something remarkable here," Clara observed as they paused by the corral fence. Brock leaned against the weathered wood, his gaze taking in the expanse of his land. "It wasn't easy. The first few years were touch and go. Drought, harsh winters, cattle thieves all tried to break me, but I'm stubborn." A faint smile touched his lips. "My father used to say I was too hard-headed for my own good." "Sometimes stubbornness is a virtue," Clara replied. "Where is your family now?" His expression sobered. "Gone. My parents had a small farm in Pennsylvania. Both passed before the war. My younger brother died at Gettysburg." "I'm sorry," Clara said softly, understanding now some of the shadows she had glimpsed in his eyes. "So you came west to start anew?" "Something like that. Couldn't face going back to the farm without them. Too many ghosts." He straightened, changing the subject. "Would you like to ride? There's a mare in the stable with a gentle disposition. The view from the ridge is worth seeing." Clara hesitated. "I haven't ridden in years, not properly. In Boston, there was little opportunity." "The offer stands whenever you feel ready," Brock said easily, no pressure in his tone. "In the meantime, there are other ways to enjoy the outdoors. The creek that runs behind the property has some of the best trout fishing in the territory." His consideration touched her. Here was a man who had witnessed the worst of humanity, both in war and in his encounters with men like the Rawlins gang, yet he had retained a fundamental kindness that Clara found increasingly compelling. Over the next few days, a routine developed. Clara helped Resita with household tasks in the mornings, finding satisfaction in simple physical work that kept her mind occupied. In the afternoons, she often accompanied Brock on his rounds of the ranch, gradually learning about the operation that sustained him. The fresh air and activity helped her sleep better at night, though nightmares still occasionally jolted her awake. On the third evening, Clara found herself unable to return to sleep after one such nightmare. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and padded quietly to the main room, thinking to sit by the dying embers of the fire until her racing heart calmed. To her surprise, Brock was already there, a book open on his lap, though he didn't appear to be reading it. He looked up at her entrance, immediately rising from his chair. "Miss James, is everything all right?" Just a dream, she said, embarrassed to have disturbed him. I'm sorry to intrude. You're not intruding, he assured her, gesturing to the other chair by the fireplace. I find myself keeping odd hours sometimes. Clara settled into the offered seat, drawing the blanket more tightly around her shoulders. For a while, they sat in comfortable silence, the crackling fire and the occasional creak of the house the only sounds. Do they ever stop? She asked finally. The nightmares. Brock considered her question seriously before answering. They change, become less frequent. Some nights you'll sleep without them entirely. Then something will trigger a memory and they'll return for a time. He stared into the flames. But they don't rule you forever if that's what you're asking. The candor of his response told Clara he spoke from experience. The war, he nodded once, and other things. Life out here isn't always gentle. Yet you chose it. I did. Because despite the hardships, there's a freedom here I couldn't find back east. Room to breathe, to build something that's entirely my own. He glanced at her. What about you, Miss James? What would you choose if you could have anything? The question caught Clara off guard. In the chaos of recent events, she had thought only of survival, not desires or dreams. I'm not sure anymore, she admitted. Before all this, I assisted my father with his teaching. I enjoyed working with the students, watching them discover new ideas. I thought perhaps I might teach someday myself. Why not still? Brock asked. Bennett wasn't wrong about the need for teachers out here. Not just in Silver Creek, there are a dozen settlements within a day's ride that would welcome an educated woman willing to take on their children. Clara considered this. Perhaps, though I admit the thought of being alone in a strange town is daunting after everything that's happened. Understandable, Brock agreed, but you're stronger than you know, Miss James. I've seen how you faced each day since you arrived here with courage and dignity despite what was done to you. His quiet confidence in her was both flattering and fortifying. Thank you. And please, after all that's transpired, I think you might call me Clara. A small smile touched his lips. Clara then, and I'm Brock. Something shifted between them in that moment. A formality dropped, a distance narrowed. They continued talking as the fire burned low, sharing pieces of their lives before their paths had crossed. Clara spoke of growing up in Boston, her father's passionate approach to education, her mother's early death from influenza. Brock told her of his Pennsylvania childhood, his time at university before the war interrupted his studies, his journey west with nothing but determination, and the skills he had acquired as a cavalry scout. When dawn began to lighten the sky outside the windows, Clara realized they had talked through the night. Surprisingly, she felt rested despite the lack of sleep, as if the conversation had provided a different kind of respite. I should help Reseda with breakfast, she said, rising reluctantly from her chair. Brock stood as well, regarding her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Clara, he began, then seemed to reconsider his words. I'm glad you couldn't sleep tonight. The simple honesty of his statement warmed her. So am I. The day of their journey to Silver Creek for the preliminary hearings arrived too quickly. Clara dressed in her borrowed blue dress, now altered by Reseda's skilled hands to fit her properly, and pinned her mother's cameo at the collar. Her father's pocket watch and wedding ring were carefully wrapped and tucked into the small carpet bag that contained her few possessions. Brock was waiting for her at the breakfast table, dressed more formally than she had yet seen him, in a dark suit coat, crisp white shirt, and string tie. He had trimmed his hair and shaved meticulously. The transformation from rancher to gentleman was striking, though Clara found she preferred his everyday appearance. Are you ready? He asked, his concern evident. As ready as I'll ever be, she replied with more confidence than she felt. They rode together in Brock's wagon rather than on horseback, a consideration for which Clara was grateful. Though she had begun taking short rides around the ranch on the gentle mare Brock had mentioned, she wasn't prepared for the long journey to town on horseback. Marshal Bennett met them at the edge of Silver Creek, his official presence providing a buffer against the curious stares of the townspeople as they made their way to the courthouse. The building was modest but well-maintained, with the territorial flag flying alongside the stars and stripes out front. Judge Harmon arrived yesterday, Bennett informed them as they climbed the steps. He's reviewed the evidence and wants to speak with you privately before the hearings begin, Miss James. Clara nodded, unconsciously moving closer to Brock. His solid presence beside her was reassuring as they entered the building, and were shown to a small anteroom where a distinguished older man in judicial robes awaited them. Judge Harmon proved to be compassionate but thorough in his questioning, taking Clara through her statement again with particular attention to the details that would establish legal jurisdiction and the specific crimes committed. Throughout the interview, Brock remained at her side, a silent support that gave her strength. When the judge was satisfied, he closed his notebook and regarded Clara solemnly. "You've endured a terrible ordeal, Miss James, but your clear testimony will ensure these men face the full penalty of the law. I've already ruled that there is sufficient evidence to proceed to trial. However, given the nature of the crimes and the danger these men represent, I'm holding the trial here in Silver Creek rather than waiting for the circuit to reach Denver." "How soon will the trial begin, Your Honor?" Brock asked. 3 days from now. "I've appointed defense counsel as required by law, though frankly, given the evidence, their position is untenable." The judge turned back to Clara. "Miss James, you will need to testify in open court. I understand this will be difficult, but it is necessary for justice to be properly served." Clara straightened her shoulders. "I understand, Your Honor. I'll do whatever is required." The judge nodded approvingly. "Marshal Bennett has arranged accommodations for you at the hotel. I suggest you remain in town until the trial concludes." As they left the courthouse, Clara's composure finally began to crack. The sight of the town square where she had stood in chains brought back a flood of terrible memories. Her steps faltered, and she might have fallen if Brock hadn't caught her elbow. "Steady," he murmured. "Let's get you to the hotel." The Silver Creek Hotel was a 2-story structure on the main street, modest but clean. Bennett had secured rooms for both Clara and Brock, though Brock insisted on inspecting Clara's room personally before allowing her to enter it. "The lock is sound," he determined, testing the door, "and the window overlooks the main street where the marshal's office can see it clearly. You'll be safe here." The concern in his voice made Clara realize something she should have considered earlier. "You don't have to stay in town, Brock. You must have responsibilities at the ranch. My foreman can handle things for a few days," he interrupted firmly. "I'm not leaving you alone here, Clara, not until this is over and those men are sentenced." His protectiveness should perhaps have chafed against her independent nature, but instead, Clara found it deeply comforting. After weeks of vulnerability and fear, knowing someone stood firmly in her corner meant everything. "Thank you," she said simply. The 3 days before the trial passed slowly. Clara remained mostly in her hotel room, venturing out only for meals in the hotel dining room with Brock at her side. The townspeople regarded her with a mixture of curiosity, sympathy, and in some cases, thinly veiled hostility. Those who had participated in or profited from the Rawlins gang's activities were not pleased to see justice coming to Silver Creek. On the evening before the trial, Clara and Brock sat in a quiet corner of the dining room after most other patrons had departed. Clara picked at her food, her appetite diminished by anxiety about the coming day. "What if I can't do it?" she asked suddenly, voicing the fear that had been growing inside her. "What if I break down on the witness stand or can't identify them?" Or Brock reached across the table and took her hand, his touch warm and steady. "You won't be alone, Clara. I'll be there the entire time. If you falter, look at me. Remember, you're no longer in their power. You're free, and your words will ensure they never hurt anyone else again." His certainty steadied her, as did the physical connection between them. Over the past weeks, they had grown increasingly comfortable in each other's presence. Small touches, a hand at her elbow, fingers brushing as they passed the coffee pot, his steadying grip as he helped her mount her horse had become natural. This deliberate clasp of hands, however, felt different, more significant. "Brock," she began, unsure what she even wanted to say, only knowing that something important hung unspoken between them. Before she could continue, the door to the dining room burst open and Marshal Bennett strode in, his expression grim. "There's been a development," he announced without preamble. "Two of the prisoners escaped during the evening meal, overpowered a deputy and fled." Clara's blood ran cold. "Which ones?" "Jeb Rawlins and Mike Decker, the ringleader and his right hand." Brock's grip on Clara's hand tightened. "Are they still in the area?" Bennett nodded grimly. "We believe so. They stole horses but didn't take supplies. My men are searching, but I want you both to return to your rooms and stay there. I'm posting deputies in the hotel tonight." The fear Clara had managed to keep at bay came rushing back. Jeb Rawlins had been the one to capture her initially, his cruel hands the first to clamp shackles around her wrists. The thought of him free and potentially seeking revenge made her physically ill. "I'll escort you upstairs," Brock said, rising immediately. "Marshal, have your men check the back staircase and the fire escape." Bennett nodded. "Already done. Don't worry, Miss James. We'll recapture them before the trial." But as Clara followed Brock up the main staircase to her room, worry was all she could do. The sanctuary of the hotel suddenly felt fragile, the coming night interminable. At her door, Brock turned to her, his expression resolute. "I'll be right across the hall. Keep your door locked. If you hear anything unusual, anything at all, call out." Clara nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. On impulse, she rose on tiptoe and pressed a swift kiss to his cheek before slipping into her room and securing the lock as instructed. Sleep was impossible. Clara sat fully dressed in a chair by the window, watching the occasional movement of deputies on the street below as they patrolled. The hours crept by, marked by the town clock's chimes. Midnight came and went. 1 o'clock. 2. Just as the clock struck 3, Clara heard a soft scraping at her window. Her heart lurched into her throat as a dark shape appeared outside the glass. A face leered in at her, illuminated by the moonlight, and Clara recognized the pockmarked visage of Jeb Rawlins. She opened her mouth to scream, but before any sound emerged, the window glass shattered inward. Rawlins was halfway through the opening when Clara's paralysis broke. She bolted for the door, but a hand grabbed her ankle, sending her crashing to the floor. "Thought you'd escaped me, didn't you?" Rawlins hissed, dragging her back toward him. "Nobody takes what's mine." "Brock," Clara screamed, kicking wildly at her attacker. "Help!" The door burst open with a crash as Brock charged in, his hunting knife already drawn. He took in the scene in an instant and launched himself at Rawlins with a roar of fury. The two men collided in a tangle of limbs, Rawlins abandoning his grip on Clara to defend himself. Clara scrambled away, watching in horror as they grappled on the floor, each fighting for control of Brock's knife. Rawlins was heavier, but Brock fought with the precision of a trained soldier. He twisted suddenly, reversing their positions and pinning Rollins beneath him. The knife hovered between them, trembling with the force of their opposing strengths. "It's over, Rollins," Brock gritted out. "Surrender now." Rollins responded with a vicious headbutt that caught Brock by surprise, momentarily loosening his grip. In that instant, Rollins seized the advantage, wrenching the knife away and plunging it toward Brock's chest. Clara didn't think she acted. Grabbing the heavy water pitcher from the nightstand, she brought it down on Rollins' head with all her strength. The earthenware shattered and Rollins slumped forward, unconscious. Brock rolled the outlaw off him and scrambled to his feet, checking that Rollins was truly subdued before turning to Clara. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his hands gentle as they checked her for injuries. "No," Clara assured him, though she was shaking uncontrollably. "You came just in time. How did you know?" "I wasn't sleeping either. I heard the glass break." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against him. "I almost lost you." The raw emotion in his voice penetrated Clara's shock. She looked up at him, seeing naked fear and something else, something deeper in his eyes. "But you didn't," she whispered. "You saved me again." Boots pounded in the hallway as Marshal Bennett and his deputies arrived, weapons drawn. They quickly secured the still unconscious Rollins while Brock explained what had happened. "And Decker?" Brock asked when he had finished. "Recaptured an hour ago trying to steal a fresh horse from the livery," Bennett replied. "Seems they split up after escaping. Good work, both of you." He glanced at Clara with newfound respect. "Especially you, Miss James. Not many would have had the presence of mind to fight back as you did." After the lawman had removed Rollins, Bennett suggested Clara might want to change rooms, but she shook her head. "There's only a few hours until morning." "I'd rather stay here with the window boarded up." Bennett looked dubious, but Brock intervened. "I'll stay with her. In the chair by the door. No arguments, Clara," he added when she began to protest. "After what just happened, I'm not letting you out of my sight until this trial is over." Too exhausted to argue, Clara acquiesced. Once Bennett had arranged for the broken window to be secured with boards and departed, she changed into her nightgown behind the privacy screen while Brock positioned the room's single chair against the door. "Try to get some sleep," he urged as she slipped into bed. "You'll need your strength tomorrow." But sleep remained elusive for them both. As dawn approached, Clara sat up in bed, drawing her knees to her chest. "Brock," she said softly, "earlier when you said you almost lost me." "What did you mean?" In the dim light of the single remaining lamp, she saw him consider his words carefully before answering. "I meant that the thought of harm coming to you is unbearable to me. These past weeks, having you at Valor Ranch, I've come to care for you, Clara. More than I should, perhaps." The vulnerability in his admission touched her deeply. "Why should? Why shouldn't you care?" "Because you deserve better than a scarred ex-soldier turned rancher," he replied with sudden intensity. "Because you have your whole life ahead of you, and choices to make that shouldn't be influenced by feelings that might be nothing more than gratitude on your part." Clara slipped from the bed and crossed to where he sat, kneeling before him so they were eye to eye. "Brock Vaughn, do you really believe I don't know my own mind? Yes, I'm grateful to you, profoundly so, but what I feel—" She placed her hand against his cheek, feeling the warmth of his skin. "What I feel is far more than gratitude. It's admiration for your courage, respect for your kindness and integrity, and something else, something I haven't had words for until now." His breath caught as he covered her hand with his own. "Clara, I was lost," she continued, needing him to understand. "Not just physically, but in every way that matters. You didn't just rescue me from those men. You showed me there was still goodness in the world, still hope." Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Brock leaned forward and touched his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, almost reverential, but it kindled something in Clara that blazed through her blood and made her feel truly alive for the first time since her ordeal began. When they parted, Brock rested his forehead against hers. "Whatever happens in that courtroom today, know this. You have a home at Valor Ranch for as long as you want it, whether that's days or a lifetime." The trial that began later that morning was a somber affair. The courtroom was packed with townspeople, some genuinely seeking justice, others merely curious about the scandal that had rocked their community. Judge Harmon maintained strict order, threatening to clear the room at the first sign of disruption. Clara testified first, her voice steady as she recounted her captivity and the auction. As Brock had suggested, whenever her resolve wavered, she found his eyes in the crowd and drew strength from his unwavering support. When she identified Jeb Rawlins as her primary captor, the outlaw glared at her with murderous hatred. But Clara didn't flinch. Brock testified next about the operation he and Bennett had planned, explaining how they had tracked the Rawlins gang for weeks before infiltrating the auction. His calm, factual account carried the weight of credibility that impressed both judge and spectators. Other witnesses followed: a stagecoach driver who had seen the original attack, townspeople who had observed Clara being brought into Silver Creek in chains, a young miner who had been forced to participate in earlier auctions and had later gone to Bennett with information. By midday, the evidence was overwhelming. Judge Harmon needed little time to consider his verdict. The 7 members of the Rawlins gang, including the recaptured escapees, were found guilty of kidnapping, human trafficking, and in Rawlins' case, murder. "The sentence for these crimes can only be death by hanging," the judge pronounced gravely, "to be carried out 3 days hence at dawn. Until that time, the prisoners will be held under triple guard at the Territorial Prison in Denver." A murmur ran through the courtroom as the prisoners were led away in chains. Clara watched them go, feeling not triumph but a complicated mixture of relief, sadness for lives so misspent, and a growing sense of closure. A chapter was ending, but another was beginning, one in which she, not fate or cruel men, would determine the course. As the court adjourned, Brock made his way to her side. "It's over," he said simply. "They can never hurt you or anyone else again." Clara nodded, the full impact of the day's events finally catching up with her. "Can we go home now? Back to the ranch?" The way Brock's face transformed at her use of the word home told Clara everything she needed to know about his feelings. "Yes," he said, offering her his arm. "Let's go home." They left Silver Creek that afternoon, not looking back as the town receded behind them. The journey to Valor Ranch seemed shorter than it had days before, the landscape more welcoming, the future more promising. As they crested the final rise and the ranch buildings came into view, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, Brock drew the wagon to a halt. He turned to Clara, his expression serious. "Before we go further, I need to be absolutely clear. When I said you have a home here as long as you want, I meant it with no obligations or expectations. If you choose to stay as my guest while you decide your future, that would be my privilege. If you decide to move on to another town or back east, I'll support that choice in any way I can." He paused, gathering his courage. "And if you might consider a third option, staying permanently as my wife, well, that would make me the happiest man in the territory. But the choice is entirely yours, Clara, and there's no rush to decide." Clara considered his words, touched by both his forthright declaration and his careful respect for her autonomy. After being treated as property to be bought and sold, having her choices honored was a precious gift. "I don't need time to consider," she replied softly. "I've known since that night by the fire that Valor Ranch feels more like home than anywhere has since. I lost my parents. And I've known since you broke down that hotel room door that my heart belongs with you. Brock Vaughn. Joy bloomed across his face, transforming his usual reserve into radiant happiness. Is that a yes? Clara smiled, feeling truly free for the first time in longer than she could remember. Yes, 1,000 times yes. He leaned across the wagon seat and kissed her, not with the gentle restraint of their first kiss, but with a passion that promised a lifetime of love and protection. When they parted, both breathless, he gathered the reins again with a grin. Then let's go home, future Mrs. Vaughn. Reseda will be beside herself with joy. She's been dropping hints about wedding preparations since your second day at the ranch. Clara laughed, the sound carrying across the open land that would now be her home. I suspected she might be. She's been teaching me to cook your favorite dishes and showing me where everything belongs, as if preparing me to take over the household. Subtle she is not, Brock agreed with a chuckle, urging the horses forward. But her heart is in the right place. As they approached the ranch house, Reseda emerged from the door, her expression changing from anxiety to delight as she saw them. She called something in Spanish that made Brock laugh again. What did she say? Clara asked. She said it's about time I brought you home properly, and that she's already moved your things to the main bedroom. He colored slightly. Though of course you'll have the guest room until the wedding. Clara stopped his gallant reassurance with a kiss. I appreciate your consideration, Brock, but after everything we've been through, I think we can dispense with some conventions. I have no desire to spend another night alone with my nightmares when I could be in your arms instead. His eyes darkened with emotion and desire. You never cease to amaze me, Clara James. Soon to be Clara Vaughn, she reminded him with a smile. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at Valor Ranch, with Marshall Bennett serving as Brock's best man and the local circuit preacher officiating. Clara wore a new dress of ivory silk that Brock had ordered specially from Denver, with her mother's cameo at her throat. Brock, resplendent in a new suit, watched her approach with such naked adoration that several of the ranch hands in attendance cleared their throats awkwardly. The celebration afterward was jubilant, with food and music lasting well into the night. When the last guest had departed and they were finally alone, Brock swept Clara into his arms and carried her across the threshold of their home, not as a rescue this time, but as a promise. In the years that followed, Clara and Brock built a life together that surpassed either of their solitary dreams. Clara established a small school on the ranch that served not only their eventual children, but those of the ranch hands and neighboring properties. Brock expanded Valor Ranch's operations, becoming one of the most respected cattlemen in the territory. They faced challenges together, drought years that tested their resilience, the normal conflicts of marriage, and occasionally, remnants of their shared trauma that manifested in nightmares or moments of unexpected fear. But through it all, they remained each other's sanctuary and strength. On their 5th wedding anniversary, as they sat together on the porch watching their young son and daughter play in the yard, Clara reached for Brock's hand. "You ever think about that day in Silver Creek?" she asked. "The auction block, the chains, your dramatic rescue." Brock's fingers tightened around hers. "Sometimes. Not as often as I used to. Why do you ask?" "I was thinking about how a moment of terrible darkness led to all this light," Clara replied, gesturing to their home, their children, the life they had built. "If the Rollins gang hadn't attacked that stagecoach, if you and Bennett hadn't been investigating them, we might never have met." "I'd like to think we would have found each other somehow," Brock said, drawing her closer. "Some things are meant to be, Clara, even if the path to them is harder than it should be." Clara rested her head against his shoulder, watching as their daughter crowned their son with a circlet of wildflowers she had gathered. "I believe you're right. And I wouldn't change a moment of our path, difficult as parts of it were, because it brought us here together." Brock pressed a kiss to her temple, his love for her as strong and steady as the day he had cut her shackles and carried her to freedom. "Together," he agreed, "always." And as the sun set over Valor Ranch, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Clara knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, not just safe, but cherished. Not just free, but truly home.